Well, everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the M2 MacBook Air and compare it against the 2015 MacBook Air that came out, about 7 years ago, and see which specific model is the better one for you. Now, I will definitely tell you there really isn't any case where the 2015 MacBook Air is the better model here, but is it worth updating to the M2 MacBook Air if you're looking, to update? Or should you just go for the M1 MacBook Air? Or should you just wait and keep your current 2015 model? Now, I will definitely tell you there is one area, and really only one area, where the 2015 model actually wins, and that's pretty much with the price tag. You can buy the 2015 MacBook Air for significantly cheaper than a M2 MacBook Air. And with that significantly cheaper cost, some would say it's a better value per dollar, it may be better value per performance, different things like that. But realistically speaking, it's worth upgrading if you're going to be getting better performance. And recently, since the M1 MacBook Air, Apple has completely converted the the Air lineup in general from being the cheaper budget, the not as heavy as performance from top models, going from that type of stigma to actually being a really, really good value for the price tag, with a huge future, with a huge performance leap, and just overall really good value in my opinion. So if you're looking at it from that standpoint, definitely the M2 MacBook Air is worth the money, but realistically speaking, the 2015 MacBook Air has one advantage, and that's with the price tag. Now, if you want to pick up a MacBook Air, either one of these, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there, and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of both of these models, there's quite a bit of a difference for sure. With the 2015 model, we actually had a really decent built MacBook. I mean, this thing stemmed from the previous generation of MacBooks before, so it didn't invent this design, but it was a really good looking MacBook, and it still kind of holds up, at least from the top and the bottom. So at the top, you had that glowing Apple logo, and still it feels extremely premium. It feels still like one of the most premium MacBooks ever. And honestly, when you hold the 2015 MacBook Air and you hold the other M2 MacBook Air, it doesn't really feel like one is way more cheaper, way more expensive. Like, they both feel obviously very premium. The M2 MacBook Air looks like the more, modern one, but the 2015 model still looks pretty good. With the M2 MacBook Air, we actually do have that, flat aluminum. There's no, curvature to it, realistically speaking. And there's also no glowing Apple logo. It's just a standard, logo there, which I think is fine. I think, we're not really looking at the front of these MacBooks too much, so it's not really a big deal to me, but it may be a big deal to you, so that is something you'll kind of have to think about. On top of that, when you actually look at the thinness of both these, they are both very thin, but like I've said before, the thinness is now changed. With the M2 MacBook Air, it is now a completely thin, it's the same amount of thinness throughout, which I actually kind of like, but I did actually miss and kind of prefer for the Air lineup that little, curvature to it. So essentially it starts at a thick point and it goes pretty much to the thinnest point all the way to the edge. And I actually like that a lot. I think that looks really, really good. And for an Air lineup, that was a great way to tell very quickly whether you had an M1, whether you had a MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro. Now it's going to be a little, harder to tell. I mean, obviously the M2 MacBook Air looks different than the M2 MacBook Pro and also the M1 Pro models, but still, I do kind of miss that curving to it, in my opinion. In terms of ports, we have a little bit of a different, section when it comes down to the ports within them. The M2 MacBook Air has 3 ports, technically speaking. So it has 2 USB-C ports, so those are Thunderbolt ports that you can go ahead and plug into different monitor or plug into, any other Thunderbolt accessories. And you also have that MagSafe charger too, which I actually do like a lot. Having that type of MagSafe charger just built into your MacBook is really cool. That does kind of free up an extra port on your MacBook as well. So I'm actually a huge fan of that. With the 2015 MacBook Air, we have 2 USB 3 ports. So we have 2 of those ports. We have a Thunderbolt 2 port. So if you wanted to use that, extra Thunderbolt 2 port, you have that capability. You had that MagSafe charger, the MagSafe 2 port, and built into the MacBook as well. And you also had an SD card slot as well. So right there, I will definitely tell you the 2015 MacBook Air, it also kind of has a leg up when it comes down to the ports within it. There's also another thing I want to hit on a little bit later, but this right here is probably its biggest asset. Having way more ports on that type of MacBook at a cheaper value at, a different price tag, I think that is a really good advantage. But even then at this point, I still think I would rather have an M2 MacBook Air just because it is a really big leap in terms of performance. Even though we're giving up some ports, I do kind of think that's a really big upgrade upgrade, at least in my opinion, and that would probably be one of the areas I would look at for these specific models, where I'd be like, okay, I'm giving up some ports, but I'm getting just a way better machine, and that is probably the area I would probably look at in my opinion. So in terms of the overall bodies and the exteriors, that kind of covers it up. I mean, I'll definitely say the M2 MacBook Air looks more modern, but I still think the 2015 MacBook Air has some character to it, and I don't think it's like a horrible deal, by any means. Now, when we flip it open, we have that beautiful display on both of these. The 2015 MacBook Air has a 13.6-inch liquid retina display, and the 2015 MacBook Air, it actually came in two different models, a 13-inch and essentially an 11-inch model, but we're focusing on the 13-inch now. And that is not the greatest panel of all time. That is probably its biggest con in my opinion. The 2015 MacBook Air's display notoriously was just not good, and in fact, it was probably its number one complaint. More than anything else, even more than the performance, the display of this MacBook just was not good at all, and I'm still not a fan of this display. It doesn't even look good on camera. I have to continuously just mess with it to make it even look good, and it just isn't a good panel. The M2 MacBook Air, on the other hand, is a very good panel. It is still probably one of the better panels Apple has made. It's not as good as the ProMotion displays they have now, but it is a really good panel, and I'm actually really happy Apple made a display like this for their MacBook Air lineup. I think it looks really good. You also have a notch on the M2 MacBook Air as well. Is it a big deal? I honestly don't think so. I have a notch on my 14-inch MacBook Pro, and I don't really think it's that big of a deal. So I don't know if you would think that too, but personally, I don't have that experience. So display-wise, the M2 MacBook Air wins as well, and especially in the performance segment. And this is where the M2 MacBook Air is going to shine. First of all, in terms of the future and the longevity of both of these, the 2015 MacBook Air is already outdated with software, technically speaking. I don't think it's getting the next version of software from, macOS Ventura. So because of that, the M2 MacBook Air is the current model. It's going to be the longest lasting MacBook Air that Apple is currently making. And because this thing has the M2 chipset, I think this MacBook is going to last a very long amount of time. This thing is going to last pretty much for probably the next 10 years, I would say. Maybe less, maybe not as much, but it's going to be lasting for a very long amount of time. So it just makes more sense to go ahead and buy something like an M2 MacBook Air, especially if you're looking at it from a longevity standpoint. But the performance segment is just absolutely out of this world. The RAM of the 2015 MacBook Air, you could either get it in 4 gigs or 8 gigs of RAM. The M2 MacBook Air can go up to 24 gigabytes of RAM. Obviously, it's going to cost more money, but you can do that. The 2015 MacBook Air had a 1.6 gigahertz dual-core Intel Core i5, whereas on the M2 MacBook Air, you can get an 8-core CPU and you can get up to 10 cores of your GPU if you need it. So just right there, just specs on paper alone, the M2 MacBook Air completely dominates the 2015 MacBook Air, but even in terms of real-world usage, this is where you can actually go ahead and tell which one is the faster one. And I will say, even for basic tasks, even if you're just going through your web browser, if you're just, doing some light note-taking, if you're just like maybe watching some videos, maybe playing a game here and there, maybe even editing a small, maybe like even like a 720p video, even small things like that, you're going to notice the animations, the time it takes to click on Safari, the time it takes to click on iMovie, the time it takes to export a video from, X, Y, and Z. It takes a lot. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it's noticeable differences that you're, seeing between a 2015 MacBook Air and an M2 MacBook Air. With the M2 MacBook Air, it's pretty much instantaneous. It's a very fast machine. Apple did a great job with the M1 chipsets, and the M2 chipset is also a good leap. It's not as big of a leap, I would say, as the M1 model, but it's still a very good thing that Apple did. And personally, when I look at the M2 MacBook Air, I think Apple's done a great job, and it's a really big upgrade coming from the 2015 MacBook Air. So to kind of sum it up, I'll be completely honest, the M2 MacBook Air is the better MacBook in every single area, in terms of battery life, in terms of performance, in terms of build quality, display, every single thing. The only thing you can even think of with the M2, with the standard 2015 MacBook Air, is pretty much with the cheaper price tag, the ports, and maybe the ability of installing Windows through Boot Camp. That's really the only other thing. Besides that, if you don't even care about anything I just said, then the M2 MacBook Air is definitely the one I would recommend buying. So that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.